So, good evening to everybody. I'm very glad to be speaking with you here this evening at the invitation of Brother Nate. I know, I can say a lot of you on the call I don't personally know. There are some names I do know and recognize, and very glad to be in your company once again. But for those who don't know me, my name is Brother Dan Langston. I'm a member of the Moorestown Ecclesia, and my wife is Sister Kim, whose parents are Brother Dave and Sister Ann Cheatham. So if you don't know me, there's a very good chance, probably 95% chance you know them. So that's just kind of the connection there to sort of help you figure out in my ecclesia and who I am and all. But our topic this evening is, as we said, current events in Israel, and it might be a little bit different than typically, having a speaker give a whole class on the subject. And I say that because what I'm doing is largely using clips from other Christadelphian speakers who have recently spoken on the subject. And I did that for the reason of when I first gave the version of this class at my ecclesia, I did it the Thursday following the attack that was on Saturday. So it was kind of the kind of thing where I didn't have a lot of preparation time to be as thorough as I'd like in the study and pulling things out. But there are a lot of videos out there who have the brothers who have done a lot of that work in the studies and bringing these things forward, especially in light of what's going on now. So I do want to kind of start out with an introduction and looking at what's happened with Israel in the attack. And there's a website called oct7map.com, and it's a website that's been set up to essentially document the attack on Israel on October 7th, just a few weeks ago. And I'm just going to read a brief paragraph from that website that describes what happens. On the morning of October 7th, 2023, Hamas led a simultaneous wave of assaults on Israeli civilian communities and military posts. The dawn attack began when Hamas launched over 5,000 rockets from Gaza into Israel, then used these strategic barrages as cover to breach the border. In this massive surprise onslaught on southern Israel, Hamas terrorists committed unfathomable atrocities that have reverberated globally. The attacks claimed the lives of more than 1,400 individuals, left more than 3,300 wounded, and saw 230 people taken as hostages. And something, that's to kind of set this in a historical context, is there haven't been that many Jews killed in a single day, civilian Jews killed in a single day, than the Holocaust. And that's the scale of what we're seeing in terms of historical importance. And that's what sets this apart from many of the other previous skirmishes that have happened in recent times. This is not something we're at the conclusion it's going to go back to the status quo in the Middle East. This is something that essentially will be cause for realignment in terms of the power balance and potentially a peace that results from this war. But Israel was completely caught off guard here. This is being called one of the worst intelligence failures in its history, if not the worst. So in a speech later that day on October the 7th, Israel's prime minister for the time, Benjamin Netanyahu, in his speech, broadcast a brief statement. He said, "Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I convened the heads of the security establishment and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists. This currently is being carried out. At the same time, I have ordered an extensive mobilization of reserves, in that we return fire of a magnitude that the enemy has not known. The enemy will pay an unprecedented price. In the meantime, I call on the citizens of Israel to strictly adhere to the directives of the IDF and Home Front Command. We are at war, and we will win it." So that was what he had to say following that initial attack on October 7th. Yeah, so quite a significant toll of civilian life, which was Hamas's intended effect. Of course, they wanted this to really send a message to Israel. And again, the significance here is Israel has been involved in a lot of skirmishes with its hostile neighbors over the years. This conflict marks the first time since it actually has declared war since the 1973 Yom Kippur War, which started, you may have seen, almost 50 years to the day of that attack. This one came at the end on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, in the time since then, Israel has got all the Hamas militants out of its territory and pushed them back. It's responded with airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, and as we've just seen over the past few days, has just mounted a ground assault into Gaza itself, and followed by many airstrikes, which were kind of clearing the way. So something else Netanyahu was also quoted as saying is that we will take mighty vengeance for this wicked day. Hamas launched a cruel and wicked war. We will win this war, but the price is too heavy to bear. Hamas wants to murder us all. This is an enemy that murders mothers and children in their homes, in their beds. An enemy that abducts elderly children, teenage girls. Every Hamas member is a dead man. We saw the beasts of prey. We saw the barbarians that we were facing. We saw a cruel enemy, an enemy worse than ISIS. And, I'm sure many of you have been following the details of the coverage of what's happening over there. And I won't go into some of the atrocities that are being committed, because it's almost beyond belief, the evilness of man towards his fellow, and ironically his own inhumanity. But following that attack, the Israeli defense minister, Yoav Gallant, said, "We will wipe out this thing called Hamas. Hamas, the Islamic State of Gaza, will be wiped from the face of the earth. It will not continue to exist. There will be no situation in which Israeli children are murdered and we all go about our business." He also said, "It's the worst terror attack the world has ever seen. Children bound together and murdered, people burned, barbaric deeds that the Jewish people has not suffered since 1945. So in the wake of that, Israel formed a national emergency government to focus on matters related to the war, to put aside their political difference over the last 9 months related to the judicial overhaul and other things. And it's really been 4 or 5 years that they've sort of had the political instability with repeated deadlocked elections and fragile coalitions. And to some extent, you might say that's a contributing factor to having been caught off guard on October the 7th. So what Israel wants to do is to completely obliterate and wipe out Hamas. And for the time being, Israel has the support of many Western countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy, and Hungary, due in large part towards its long-standing allyship with a lot of countries in the West, but also because of the horrific barbarities and atrocities that it suffered at the hands of Hamas, and the recognized need for Israel to defend itself against such inhumanity. Now, the leader of Hamas has warned that their assault on Israel would spread to the West Bank and Jerusalem. Now, it's clear that we're witnessing the beginning stages of a war that will have significant consequences for the Middle East. Indeed, as I said at the outset, that this isn't just something that it goes back to the status quo. The status quo is changing with this war. So, I think when we have something like this happening, dealing with God's people, the Jews, and the importance that they are in the scheme of in the prophetic scheme, it's something that we can't ignore. We can't not talk about something this important. And So as I said, I'd like to do that by way of some videos that have already been put out into the Brotherhood by Christadelphian speakers. Maybe some of them you'll have seen, maybe some of them not. But I want to go ahead and get into those. So these first couple of clips is given by Brother Roger Lewis, and he actually gave this talk in 2007 at the Echo Lake Ecclesia, and it's entitled, the whole talk is entitled Dramatic Moves in the Gaza Strip, but this particular clip is going to kind of set us up for Palestine in the Bible and kind of its roots and how that relates to the modern day Palestinians. So I'm going to go ahead and click play. Let me know if you can't hear it, and we'll try to sort that out.
Palestine and Palestinians. Well, it's a biblical term actually, because the word Palestinian comes from the word Palestina that's found in the Bible. It's the Hebrew word Pelesheth. And that word Pelesheth, meaning rolling or migratory, hence the land of the wanderers, is translated as Palestina 3 times, as Palestine once, as Philistia 3 times, and as Philistines once. But it's the word translated Palestina. It's where the word Palestine comes from, and where the word Palestinian is derived from. So there is a biblical basis to this particular word. So I guess what we would say is that from a scriptural perspective, therefore, a Palestinian is a Philistine, and a Philistine is a Palestinian, because certainly they control the same territory, the Palestinians compared to the Philistines of old. They manifest the same attributes, so they qualify on both counts, and they're going to receive or share the same end from a biblical perspective. In fact, interestingly enough, the Arabic for the term Palestine liberation is Tahrir Philistine. So you can see that interplay between the word Philistine, Philistine, and Palestine, Palestinian. It's all one word in the Hebrew. So there's a biblical background to that particular word. Now, I should really cover my position at the outset, in case you think I'm heading off in the wrong direction biblically, and just say this. Modern Palestinians are not in any way descended from the actual Philistines of Old Testament times. There's no actual connection with the Philistines. There's no ethnic or linguistic or cultural connection whatsoever. The Philistines are gone, brothers and sisters. They were exterminated off the face of the earth, as we shall see in a set of prophecies that we're going to look at later on. In fact, I'd have to say that the whole story of the Palestinian people today is the most amazing media fraud perpetrated by the Palestinian people themselves.
So what's interesting about that is, the Palestinians occupying that area today, as Brother Roger said, don't have a direct line, to the Philistines of the Bible. But what is interesting is that the people that's there now essentially are constituted to play that same role, that same adversarial role towards Israel, occupying that stretch of land. In this next clip here from that same class, Brother Roger talks about how safety for Israel, peace, that lasting peace for Israel comes only when Palestine is subdued, and we'll see that as long as they've been in that area, there's been conflict.
I think the Bible made it absolutely clear that there was only ever safety for Israel when Palestina was subdued. So he took at this little run of quotations that I think helps to establish that. Chronicle says, David smote the Philistines and subdued them, and took Gath and her towns out of the hand of the Philistines. 1 Kings 4 says, Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms unto the land of the Philistines, for he had dominion unto Gaza. 2 Chronicles 17 says, and the fear of the Lord fell upon all the kingdoms, and the Philistines, the Palestinians, brought Jehoshaphat tribute. Again, we're going to be told that in the days of Uzziah the king, it says that he went forth and warred against the Palestinians and built cities about Ashdod and among the Philistines, which, by the way, tells us that the Jewish practice of building cities or settlements in occupied territory is not a new one. The Uzziah was doing that many years ago, building settlements in occupied territory. And of the time of Hezekiah, it says, as we've seen before, Hezekiah, smote the Philistines even unto Gaza. See all those key words? David warred, Solomon had dominion, Jehoshaphat received tribute, Uzziah went forth and warred against them, Hezekiah smote the Philistines. Now what's interesting is that all those kings of Judah had alliances, political alliances with other nations, but none of them ever negotiated a peace treaty with Palestine, because peace only came when that area was under military subjection. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself this question, brothers and sisters, as to how the peace and safety of Ezekiel 38 might come about? I give you two options. A peaceful negotiation with Hamas, signed in the spirit of brotherly friendship, or another military confrontation that the Jews win on the basis of Psalm 83. I think if Psalm 83 is an indicator, it would suggest perhaps the latter, wouldn't it? Triggered by some dramatic event. We don't know what it might be. I don't know, by the way, whether that is what will happen, but it's a possibility. And that there will be an Israeli reprisal after the manner of David and Solomon and Jehoshaphat and Uzziah and Hezekiah of old, a rout of opposing forces, and that Israel may take control of the West Bank absolutely, which biblically she must be in control of at the time of the end, and put a ring of steel around Gaza to contain the spirit of hatred that broods and festers in that place. And I believe, brothers and sisters, that if Israel does that at some stage in the future, she will have set the scene for the invasion of Gog, who's the latter-day Assyro-Babylonian. Now, actually, there's a really good point that I want to make here. So, if you've been sleeping throughout the course of this particular address, now's the time to wake up and pay attention for this last crucial few moments. Now, here's the great lesson. What's the great... Let me see if I can just put that... Well, that's much better. Now I've really got your attention. What was the greatest calamity of Israel in Old Testament times? Answer: when the Babylonians came down and overthrew the nation and led them off into captivity. Question: were there some surrounding Arab nations that threw in their lot with Nebuchadnezzar when he came down to be hostile to Israel? Yes. Were they the main story? No. What was the main story? Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon. When Rome came down with Titus, or Vespasian and Titus, and marched against Israel, were there some surrounding nations that threw in their lot with the Romans to settle old scores against Israel? Yes. Were they the main story? No. What was the main story? Rome, Babylon. When Gog comes down at the time of the end, might there be some Arab nations associated with Gog in her invasion? Yes. Are they the main story? No. What's the main story? Gog, latter-day Babylon. See, it's a question of understanding the framework of Bible prophecy. I think that what these prophecies indicate to us is that there's every likelihood of further Jewish-Arab controversy, but that's not the same as saying that it's the great controversy at the time of the end.
Brother Roger's making the point that Israel, even in its history, really only had safety when its enemies were essentially brought under military subjugation, as opposed to, a peace treaty or political agreements or anything like that. And in regarding the point about when Gog comes down into the land, being joined by Arab nations, that's you see a little bit of that in Psalm 83. And, the nations there is something we'll look at in the next clip, but I do want to read Psalm 83, verses 1 through 5. Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate. against thee. And then later in the psalm, it goes on to list all of the different groups of people. And, it's very likely that this is dealing specifically with the time of Armageddon, and when Gog comes down into the land and it's joined by a host of other nations, and particularly, the anti-Semitism that's a part of it. So the next clip we're going to look at is taken from a talk that was posted earlier this year in February, given by Brother Jim Cowie. I don't know if he actually gave it in February, but that's when it was posted. And it's a larger, the overall class is on Psalm 83, and he really digs in and gets into details. But for we're going to drop in at the point where he's tying this into the Battle of Armageddon with what's happening here, and as well tying it into the image of Nebuchadnezzar. So we'll get into that one.
So we can come back, I think, to Psalm 83 now. We've got the roots of Psalm 83, which is an Armageddon psalm. So I'm going to read it again from verse 2. They have for lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up their head. And that's what I said. In the King James it says, the head. It should read, their head. You know what the word head is in Hebrew? Rosh. They've lifted up their Rosh. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, and this of course is the policy of Iran today, it was the very clear policy of Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. That's the policy of Iran and those who are supporters of Iran. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. And then we've got a list of the confederates. And it lines up with Nebuchadnezzar's image. So who's the first in the list? Well, of course, the tabernacles of Edom. Well, we know who Edom represents. Edom represents Babylon the Great, the latter days, the most anti-Semitic power on earth. So clearly, Edom's got to be there, doesn't it? So here we've got Babylon, the head of the image. Well, who comes next? The Ishmaelites. Well, they're Muslims, aren't they? Where do you find Muslims? From Syria across to Pakistan. They're all Muslim. And they'll be part of the Confederacy because that was part of the Medo-Persian Empire. But read on, of Moab and the Hagarenes into verse 7. Gebal and Ammon and Amalek. Amalek was a son of Esau, you'll remember. The Philistines were the inhabitants of Tyre. Philistines, Palestinians, yep. Tyre, Hezbollah, yep, you got it? So what we have here, of course, is Nebuchadnezzar's image. And down here in verse 8, who do we meet? It says Assur in the King James. You know who that is? It should be Assyria. And the power of Gog is called the latter-day Assyrian all through the book of Isaiah and in the book of Micah. Okay? When the Assyrian shall come into our land. Micah chapter 5. So, we know what this is about. This is about the invasion of Israel in the latter days. And it has an outcome, and the outcome is the destruction of that power upon the mountains of Israel. So verse 8 says, Assyria also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot. And by the children of Lot is meant those false religions. For from Lot came Moab and Ammon. They were, of course, born in very difficult circumstances, where his daughters did something quite wrong to their father. And out comes these illegitimate children, okay? Just like the churches that support the papacy and will support this invasion are illegitimate. So you see how active this really is.
Yeah, so that one I put in, I know because Psalm 83 in some cases is understood as a description of, a war with the Arabs that will happen, which will precede the Gogian invasion. And the point Brother Jim here is making is that it may more accurately deal with Armageddon itself and when Gog comes down and the nations that are allied with it. Now, the next clip is swinging back to Brother Roger in that talk we were looking at earlier. And this is going to deal with expectations for Palestine. And remember, he's speaking in 2007, and based on an interpretation of scriptural teaching and prophecy. These are some expectations that he thinks we can see. And it's very interesting to see how closely it tracks with what's happening right now.
Well, let's see what we do expect. What's our biblical expectation for the latter days? Well, as we've said, we expect the increasing drive of independent Palestinian activity in the coastal region of the Gaza Strip. We expect the increasing tendency of the Palestinian movement in Gaza to foment a state of enmity with Israel. We see the increasing likelihood that Israel's security with at least the Gaza Palestinians will not come by peace, but possibly by some form of military control. And we see the increasing tension of the Palestinian conflict in Gaza as presaging the invasion of Gog and the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'll tell you why, because those three quotations at the bottom, Obadiah 19, Joel 3, Isaiah 11, all passages we've looked at today suggesting a latter-day Palestina, but not only do they suggest a latter-day Palestina, those particular passages also suggest the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, because Obadiah says that in that day, saviours will come up on Mount Zion. And Joel 3 says there'll be a voice that roars in Jerusalem. And Isaiah 11 says there'll be an ensign set up for the nations. They're all code words for the coming of Christ, aren't they, brothers and sisters? What a marvellous thing. As we see these things unfolding in the Middle East right now, we can have absolute confidence that Christ is near.
So, it's pretty accurate. Next clip is from Brother Ken Whitehead.
Have a quick look over it.
And this one deals with Saudi Arabia's role potentially in resolving the current conflict that we're seeing, and what it has to do with Lebanon and Gaza.
Let's have a quick look over in Joel chapter 3, because Joel chapter 3 talks about the Battle of Armageddon and the gathering of the nations to the valley of Jehoshaphat. And that starts in the first few verses and then continues on from verse 9. So you have in verse 2, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat and plead with them there for my people and my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. As I said, when we come to Daniel chapter 12, we talk about the end of the scattering being accomplished. So that he tells us that this time period is equivalent to the time period of Daniel 12. Joel chapter 3, gathering all nations. Notice in verse 1, God brings again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. The captivity of Judah, we could say, finished in 1948, when Israel was declared a nation. There's no more captivity of Judah since 1948. And then the captivity of Jerusalem ended in 1967 with the Six-Day War and the control of Jerusalem. So this is talking about that same time of the end period. And then sandwiched, let's go down to verse 9. Proclaim this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war come up. And you go down to verse 12, and we're told that they come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. So you've got those first few verses, and then from verse 9 on, continuing to talk about Armageddon. But sandwiched in between them, which must mean it happens at the same time as the gathering to Armageddon, are our verses 4 to 8. And I'm going to talk about this, as I said, more at the end, but notice in verse 4, what's it talking about? Tyre and Zidon and all the coasts of Palestine. Now, where's Tyre and Zidon today, geographically? What country is it? Lebanon. Did everybody say Lebanon? They did. Lebanon. Who's in charge of Lebanon, really? Hezbollah. Will they be called into this war? We don't know for sure. But here we have, what have you to do with me? Why are you doing things to my people? Tyre and Sidon. Who else? All the coasts of Palestine, which has got to be the Palestinians in Gaza and and the coast means the borders, which would include the West Bank as well. What are you doing to me and my people? The prophet says, in earlier times you rejoiced when my people were sent off into captivity. Matter of fact, you helped people take my people into captivity amongst the Grecians, it says, meaning the Gentiles, the Greek countries of Europe. They were scattered, and you were happy about that. But I'm going to bring my people back into their land. And when I raise them, verse 7, out of the place where you have sold them, I will return your recompense upon your own head. Rockets coming down from above. Your recompense is going to be returned on your own head. And then your people will be subject to what Israel wants to do with you. Tyre and Sidon and Palestine. What Israel wants to do with you. And what will Israel want to do with them? Sell them to the Sabaeans. Who are the Sabaeans? The people of Sheba, the Saudi Arabians and the Arab states in a similar area. So you are going to be sold into their control. Now we don't know what that means, whether they'll actually be taken out of the land to Sabea, to Sheba, to Saudi Arabia, whether they'll be deported or what will be. But whatever it is, this passage is telling us that Saudi Arabia will control the future of Lebanon and the Palestinians. Now I'm going to come back to that. And why is that important to the present situation? It's important to the present situation because Saudi Arabia is on the cusp, said Benjamin Netanyahu, of making an agreement with Israel. And I'll show you a little video, some video clips later on about that. So we're getting very close to the Sabaeans taking control of what's happening in regard to the Palestinians and Lebanon. Now, when this latest, I'll call it a skirmish at the moment, and I think it's a lot more than that, and we don't know how long it's going to go for, but this war, as it's been declared, when it began on the basis that the Palestinians were saying, this is Hamas, the Palestinians in general, that we're fighting this war called the Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Now Al-Aqsa, of course, is the mosque located on the Temple Mount, right alongside the Dome of the Rock, and right there where the temple was originally built. But this is the point, what I put together on Friday night to talk about the Palestinians and Lebanon and the problem being solved in Joel chapter 3. In Joel chapter 3, just going over this is our conclusion. There's a couple of things to look at here. Joel 3, as we said from verse 4, we're in the time of Armageddon because that's, as we said, the early verses, and then taken up again in chapter 9 and chapter 11, verse 11. Joel 3, the early verses, then verse 9, 11, assemble yourselves and come. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Yahweh. Tyre and Sidon are in Lebanon, and all the coasts of Palestine. God's saying, why are you railing against me? What have you got to do with me? What's this all about? And he does say, swiftly and speedily I will return your recompense upon your own head, because you sold my children to the Grecians. This is in history, this is time gone by, when the Jews were scattered. And he says, God says, the children also of Judah, verse 6, the children of Jerusalem have you sold unto the Grecians. That is in the original word, that Javan, which is the area of, literally of Greece and of European countries. And the Jews were, weren't they? They were sold off into the European territories for centuries. Centuries. So God says in the latter time, he says, verse 7, I will raise them up out of the place whither ye have sold them. In other words, you had them under your control and you pushed them out of the land. And the figure is selling them. I'll bring them back from where you sold them. And of course we know that many of them came back from Europe and other countries that they'd been pushed out to centuries and centuries ago. And I will return your recompense upon your own head. Returning a recompense. Well, payback. Payback is what it means. It's payback time. So in verses 4 to 8, the Lebanon and the Palestinians will be sold into the hands of the Sabaeans. I'll return your recompense. In verse 8, I'll sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah. In other words, Israel will be in control. They're so much in control, I'm told by Brother Bobby earlier on, that they've got that much control over the Gaza Strip, they can just switch off the power, and 2 million people have got no power. That's not a bad sense of control over the territory, is it? So God has sold these people into the hands of the children of Israel. Same with Lebanon.
So the next clip is from Brother Pete Owen in a talk he gave on October the 8th, which is the same day of the clip that we just watched from Brother Ken. And this clip here is a little bit more information regarding the role that Hamas and Hezbollah might play or will play in the lead up to Armageddon.
Yea, verse 4. And what have you to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Will you render me a recompense? And if you recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense upon your own head? You've taken my silver and my gold. You've carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem you've sold to the Grecians. So, in the build-up to the Battle of Armageddon, there are two groups of people mentioned in verse 4. Tyre and Zidon. Tyre and Zidon, where are Tyre and Zidon based today? Which country would they be in? Lebanon. So I tried to put a help on the slide here, boys and girls, if you're making a note. So Tyre and Zidon, that's Lebanon. That's the north of the land of Israel. That's where a militant organization, or a terrorist organization, Hezbollah, are sponsored by Iran. They've also fired rockets into Israel in the last 24 hours to show their support for the Palestinians. So, in verse 4, Tyre and Zidon, we might make a note. Hezbollah, that region. And all the coasts of Palestine. Or the Revised Version says, the regions of Philistia. And when we read the regions of Philistia, our minds perhaps straight away go to the Philistines. And the Philistine territory is the ancient territory of Gaza today. And so what we have in Joel 3 and verse 4 is something of the territory of the terrorist organizations who will come to the fore in the last days. And what do? They've taken my silver and my gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah, the children of Jerusalem, they've taken hostages in the last 24 hours. Now, we would never be so foolish just to be saying, having read that, what we've seen in verse 4, that is the perfect fulfillment that we've just seen this weekend. But we would say, when we're looking at the events that are currently unfolding in the Middle East, in the Holy Land, that this verse in the build-up to the Battle of Armageddon, where we're starting to see these peoples come to the fore, and we're starting to see some of their behaviors match what the ancient prophets said would happen. And so now we start to ask ourselves the question, well, what next? And we should be absolutely clear. We don't know the details. Who predicted yesterday? I don't think many of us thought that we'd be doing this talk this afternoon. I tell you what, I certainly didn't. But it happened, didn't it? So it's right that we just try to frame our thinking, to reflect on it. If nothing else, for our young people and children, to keep our minds focused through the lens of Scripture into what's going on. Well, we don't think there's going to be a quick fix to this. We think it's likely that a significant conflict will be ahead. We think it's highly likely that Israel will go into Gaza. There'll be a ground offensive, and that they will go in because of the hostage situation. They'll have no choice. The possible further involvement of the likes of Hezbollah. The Israeli government and opposition, we think because they've been so crippled, and it's not just us, There are plenty of commentators across the world who are seeing that because of the crippling of the government, Hamas has been able to seize this unique opportunity. So I think it's likely in the coming days and weeks that, of course, there'll still be continual infighting, as every government there always will be, where men are concerned. But all the same, we think there may be some cooperation in order for the country to be able to make decisions and deal with a war. We think, I certainly do, that the United States and their allies will do everything they can to keep that peace deal on the table. We'll reflect on that shortly. We think that the peace of Ezekiel 38 is critical to Bible prophecy. We wonder, and we're getting into speculation here, because we're talking about tomorrow and the next day and the week after and the month after, the year. But we wonder that Israel may justify its position. The government was elected on the premise that they would take the West Bank. Now, they've not been in a position to be able to do that for all the reasons we've reflected on already. But we wonder that this may provide a justification for them to say, we've got no choice. We can't have the likes of Hamas as terrorists in our country, roaming around the West Bank where we've got our people living. So you wonder that it may become the driver for them to take the mountains of Israel, the West Bank. And we also wonder that, watching on with a bird's eye view from the north, Russia will subtly, initially, provide support to the Palestinians before, at some stage, it will be less subtle, and they will drop down into the land and they'll come on to the mountains of Israel.
Yeah, so as Brother Pete says, regarding the speculation, we don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm also of the opinion that the peace of Ezekiel 38 will follow this war, and I think also as an outcome of this war, if not during the war, Israel will take control of the West Bank and so be able to knock down the wall that separates it, and Israel can truly be dwelling without bars or walls or gates. And I think, down the road from this conflict, likely when we're already gathered to judgment at Sinai, will be that invasion of Russia coming down on the mountains of Israel. So I think that's how close we are, that's where this is going. So I think I've got one last clip here.
Yay.
And that is the question of Israel in the West Bank here, speaking a little bit more to that.
And so what of the West Bank? Do we think it's likely that Israel could look to completely annex the West Bank? We've seen in the last few months tensions in the West Bank. This article asks this: what does the future look like? With Israel continuing to grow its settlements and entrenching its occupation, a political situation seems distant as ever. Challenges today, like the Israeli ultra-nationalist government, the growth of Palestinian armed groups, and the fragility of the Palestinian Authority are different from previous years, which is why intelligence agencies, diplomats and analysts have been increasingly warning of the likelihood of a massive flare-up. That article was written a couple of months ago. If I was the editor of that newspaper, I'd be getting that guy to write me a few more articles, because that's what's happened this weekend, the massive flare-up. And we've reflected, haven't we? Part of it is because of this weakened position that Israel are in, that Netanyahu managed to get back into power as the prime minister, but he had to do so by making many deals, not least with an exceptionally hard right group of ultranationalist Jews who said, yes, we will go into government with you, but on this principle. The first guiding principle of the government in Israel was published, this is earlier this year, declares that the Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel. It says that includes the occupied West Bank. and promises to advance and develop settlements there. About 600,000 Jews live in about 140 settlements built since Israel's occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem in 1967. In a coalition deal with the ultranationalist religious Zionism party he signed last week, this is back in January, Mr. Netanyahu agreed to retroactively legalize the outposts. He also promised to annex the West Bank while choosing the timing and weighing of all the state of Israel's national and international interest. Such a step would be opposed by Israel's Western and Arab allies. So Netanyahu this year has said it's in his policies to annex the West Bank. We wonder that the conflict that we've seen this weekend may be the driver for it. And so we see these settlements in the West Bank. We've seen them grow and grow. We see now over 500,000, and it doesn't stop. Israel just in the last few months keeps approving more expansion in the West Bank. Now you're in Ezekiel 38. Will you just flick back to chapter 36? Because we shouldn't be surprised by this. We're not making any comments on the rights and wrongs of it, but it simply is Bible prophecy being fulfilled. Because Ezekiel, prophesying over 2,500 years ago, said that when the Jews came back to the land, they would come onto the mountains. The mountains are the West Bank. And they would grow and multiply. So look, Ezekiel 36 verse 8, O mountains of Israel, you'll shoot forth your branches, you'll yield your fruit to my people of Israel. Verse 10, I will multiply men on you. Verse 9, you will be tilled and sown. So we're not surprised to see headlines like this, Israel to seize 120 acres of Palestinian farmland in the West Bank. The Jews will farm, we're told. Ezekiel 36 and verse 9. On the West Bank. And so we're interested. And we're extremely interested to see the language that's used in Ezekiel 36, where it says in verse 11, I will multiply upon you man and beast, and they will increase and bring fruit, and I will settle you. And that's what we see, don't we, on the West Bank today, the settlements of the Jewish people as they keep building on the West Bank. Brother John Thomas, or Dr. John Thomas, writing as a Christadelphian over 170 years ago, spoke of the fact that he believed from reading his Bible, reading here Ezekiel chapter 36, that before the invasion of the country by Gog, by Russia, he wrote there will be a considerable gathering of Israelites on the mountains of Israel. Now, he doesn't say the West Bank because at that time it wasn't called the West Bank. We'll come to that very shortly. That time it was simply called, it was just the mountains. It was just the geography of the region. It was the mountains of Israel. Today we call that area the West Bank. But he could see from Bible prophecy there would have been a considerable gathering of Israelites on that territory before the Russians dropped down. When he said there would be a considerable gathering of Israelites, do you think he thought there might have been 50 settlers? Do you think he'd have taken, what about 1,000? 1,000, a considerable gathering, 1,000. What about 10,000? Can you imagine if he could see what we're seeing? Over 500,000 Jews on the mountains of Israel. That's an extraordinary, extraordinary prophecy that's only possibly been able to be fulfilled since 1967.
So, very important things are happening right now as we see the will of our Father continuing to unfold, particularly as it concerns his people, Israel. And it brought to mind for me Luke chapter 10, verses 23 through 24. And this is Jesus speaking to his disciples, right, regarding his own ministry. Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you that many prophets and kings wanted to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. And I think for us, we can certainly relate to that in our own time with what we're seeing now in the continuing fulfillment of prophecy that we've really been blessed to see for our whole lives, really. 1967, 1948, even before that. So it's just, I want us to be able to truly see these things for the importance that they have, and to really grasp the gravity of it, really the importance. And it leads to 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10, consideration. The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. What manner of persons ought ye to be? So we don't have a lot of time left, brothers and sisters, and I know maybe we kind of feel like that's maybe a chicken little in the sky it's falling kind of a thing, that we've been here before, significant events have been happening, and well, we're still waiting, and we're very close, and we know that because of the magnitude of the prophecies we see being fulfilled, and hopefully we're not lulled to sleep and taking for granted all that we have been seeing, even in just these past few years. The birth pangs that Jesus said would come, and that's certainly part of it in what we're seeing. So just to take heed for how you walk, and understand the importance of what we're seeing now.